I want to talk a little bit about self-discipline. I think that at some point we all feel like we're not as self-disciplined as we can be. And I'm going to try to explain something, anyway, in my view, a very simplistic reason why, or an explanation why that might be happening. Now, I want to start out with thinking about a couple of terms. First of all, I want to talk about our imagination and about the unknown. Now, if you're taking notes, let's write these words down. Write imagination and then write the unknown. Now, in imagination, when we say, I don't think I want to do that, because we're using an imagination to say that we imagine something to be true that we don't know whether it's going to be true or not. We don't really know what's in the unknown. It's in our imagination. We often pretend that we know how someone's going to respond or what's going to happen if we do something. But until we really do it, we may be able to predict maybe a little bit, but in truth, we really don't know what's going to happen because we don't know the unknown. Now, when you are sure and positive that you know how things are going to happen, then you're not really living a life that's fully open and present, because when you start predicting things, that also means that you won't do things because you predict them inaccurately. So back to the imagination and the unknown. Part of life is about willing to take risks to step into the unknown. Again, our brains use our imagination to predict something that either a worst case scenario or sometimes a good case scenario, but that prediction is an imagination. It hasn't actually happened. It's in the unseen known of who we are. Now I want to talk about absolutes and relative truth. Absolute truth. And absolute truth is the fact that I'm sitting on a chair. It is just a chair. That's an absolute. You can't argue about absolutes. They are just absolutely true. Now, you might not like that chair because of the shape or the color, whether it's red or blue-green, or because it's got a different type of cushion on it. However, it's still a chair. Relative truth is what I experience with an absolute truth. If I don't like the chair, that's my truth. But what's true is it's just a chair, or that's just a wall, or that's just a house. Those are absolute truths. Now, absolutes are things that can't be, they can't be denied that they're true. They're just how they're true. It's like we call an elephant an elephant. That's just an absolute truth. The last three terms I want to talk about, look at my notes here, are attitude, perceptions, and beliefs. We all have attitudes, and we all have beliefs, and we all have perceptions. And the attitude that we have, and the perceptions that we have, and the beliefs that we have all influence the imagination that we have about the unknown, and it also influences the relative relationship we have with absolutes. In other words, when someone shows up in your world, your brain's going to use its past experiences, your attitudes, your perceptions, and your beliefs to decide what your relative truth is about that absolute truth or just a person, and then you will begin to imagine what that person is like. So you either will say something to them that you want them to know, or you won't say something to them that you want them to know because you don't know what the outcome is going to be, right? Again, these are the kind of four walls that we live in because we are unwilling to or unable to really talk about the things that are really going on the inside of us because of this imagination that we have, our inability to connect with that. All right, so inability to want to move toward something that we don't know what the outcome is. We want an absolute outcome. We don't want to have an emotion that's on the relative side of absolute. In other words, we want to know absolutely. We want to know what's going to happen in the absolute truth. We just want to know absolutely what's going to be true. We don't want to really take the risk that it might be something in the relative side of truth that we don't like. That really, again, prevents us from making choices, correct? And those choices come from our perceptions, attitudes, and beliefs. And those three things come from our past experiences. Now, I'm going to transition for just a moment because I want to talk about the cell wall. Someone said to me yesterday, and quite appropriately, that I just have to dig those emotions back up again, so I don't ever want to do that. So I had this wonderful idea about what she was really talking about, and so I explained it to her this way. Ask her to draw a circle on her page, and she did. And then I asked her to write down the things that were always true when she was her best person in the center of the circle. And she wrote things like this: that she feels loved and cared for and valuable and touched and important. I said, okay, great. So here's the deal. Did you know that when your cells reproduce in your body, they reproduce exactly who they are to the next cell? Okay? So in other words, the current cell replicates itself exactly to the new cell. That's how that is. This is very simplified, okay? I'm not a scientist, but I want you catch the idea. So that means that every cell, every time it reproduces itself, is the same cell. So if you make a decision a long time ago that you don't like something, then every time the cell reproduces, it's going to reproduce that same I don't like this, right? So do you see how this works? That your cell reproduces the same perceptions, attitudes, and beliefs every time it reproduces itself. That's because inside the cell is this memory, or we're going to actually call it the emotion. In other words, when you are first born, you are so innocent and perfect. You have no unpleasant energy on the inside of you. And so your cell is pretty perfect. As we go along the way, we have a tendency to hold on to our emotions. And when we hold on to an unpleasant emotion, it gets attached inside the cell. Now be with me for just a moment, okay? Now, an unexpressed emotion never goes away. The only way that you can actually feel an emotion is if it passes through the cell wall. And as that emotion passes through the cell wall, you experience that emotion. Now, when something passes through the cell wall, is it inside the cell anymore? No, it passes through. It's outside of the cell. And that's why you feel the emotion. So you're going along life and you have some unpleasant experiences where you're hurt and angry and sad and don't feel like anybody loves you. Now, the pleasant emotion is still hanging around. It's inside the cell. But the unpleasant emotion is also hanging around because you said, okay, now I want to hold on to this because I don't want to let go of it, right? Or it's still in memory, and the emotions are so powerful, I'm just going to hold on to it, right? So that unpleasant emotion is still inside the cell, along with the pleasant emotion. I mean, they're there, but the thing that happens, unfortunately, is that the unpleasant emotion is very powerful, and so it sticks around. Now, I imagine this to be true. Now, think about this circle again, right? Now, let's talk about the unpleasant emotion. Now, think about a cell being circular, and on the rim of the cell, on the inside of the cell, if you write down all these unpleasant emotions, right? Like, I'm angry, I'm hurt, I'm sad, I'm bitter, I'm unforgiving. Those unpleasant emotions are at the outside, or actually the inside, circling the inside of the cell. In other words, the pleasant emotions can't be experienced because the unpleasant emotions are preventing them from going through the cell wall. That's why when we talk about emotions having to be experienced, well, unpleasant emotions have to be experienced before you can experience a pleasant emotion, is because those unpleasant emotions are holding you, okay? So when you experience the anger and the hurt and the bitterness or the unforgiveness that you've been holding on to, those unpleasant emotions pass through the cell wall, and then what's left behind? What's left behind is the joy, the things that make you feel great. But the only way this happens is for the emotions to pass through the cell wall that have been lodged inside it, and it leaves behind it this feeling of joy and happiness and contentment, and feeling like you can do whatever you want to do and make better choices. Now, what I'm saying to you, and I started out saying earlier on, is that if you have difficulty with making decisions about what you want to do, like either losing weight, and there's lots of other reasons for this, or asking your boss for a job, or negotiating the price of a car, or whatever it is that is difficult for you, that's just based on your emotions, that's because your imagination is more powerful than what might really happen. In other words, you're imagining in your brain in advance that there's going to be some unknown outcome that you don't want to experience, because when you can't do something and say I can't do that, well, if it's something that you actually could do, most generally it's because you don't want to experience an emotion. So you're imagining something to be true that's absolute. Remember my imagination and my unknown and my absolute and my relative truth? So your imagination wants absolute truth, but since you're unwilling to go into the unknown, you don't want to have emotions in the relative side of things, how you experience the truth. Well, the absolute truth would be asking for the raise. You know, the relative truth would be how it feels if you get denied, or how it would feel if you got your raise. Now, again, the thing that is the most important here actually is the beliefs, or the perceptions, attitudes, and beliefs that we have that create the imagination. In other words, our past experiences inform our brain that this is what's happened in the past, and that's what's always going to happen in the future. No matter what happens, I never get my way. I never have enough money. I never get the raise. So my imagination, my perceptions, attitudes, and beliefs create inside myself a belief, an imagination. And so since I want an absolute truth, since I'm believing it, it's true, I'm never going to really be able to ask for the raise, or negotiate for the price of the car, or things are probably never going to go my way. And that's because, again, I'm unwilling to use my words to say, this is what I'd like. See, when you ask for something, you have an emotion, this fear or this uncomfortableness shows up. And when that uncomfortableness shows up, when you're doing something that you don't really want to do, but you know that you want to do, that's the uncomfortableness is the emotion passing through the cell wall. But once you ask it, it's on the table, it's much more comfortable. See, just asking it is stepping into the unknown. And the relative truth is that you experience after that what really happens, right? And so then it changes the perception and the attitude and the beliefs you have about asking for things. So you're changing really who you are in this process. I love this idea because, again, you're moving these unpleasant, unknown emotions on the inside of us away from us, because if you continue to hold on to these perceptions or these attitudes and these beliefs that don't have any foundation in truth, then you're preventing yourself from being your whole and complete person. Now, I hope that you enjoyed this today, and I will see you again soon.